Welcome to the Great Lakes podcast. It is a pleasure to introduce Mr. Anand Shankar, who is currently the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer for Deloitte South Asia, with more than 37 years of experience, largely in the world of consulting. It will be, I think, very interesting to delve into a couple of fundamental questions that I have in mind. And with that perspective, allow me to start. So, Anand, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much for giving us this time. So, I had a slightly broader perspective to start from, and then I will request you to conclude with your views on what kind of attitude, training, and process should young people who are aspiring to join the workforce in business management domain largely,
Right.
and of course with your consulting background, maybe in consulting,
Sure.
right? So the broader perspective is that we are undergoing structural changes in the world of business due to geopolitics, due to social, cultural, environmental changes. Uh, One of the geopolitical context is how it seems that we have come full circle uh, geopolitically, wherein so many liberal countries are now going towards the right. And does it have any implications for businesses? The answer obviously is yes, but then how? So this is just one. And then there are so many other things. For example, what the internet has done to communication globally. Uh, what does mobility of the workforce mean today compared to, let's say, 25 years ago? How maybe erstwhile third world countries have geared up, and technologically, educationally, academically, they have also geared up, and how they are sharing now in the mainstream of the global economy, or trying to at least. So one can name similar such variables that
Right.
have created. So I was going to ask you that in your experience, 37 years that you've spent in the industry at various levels and verticals, structurally, has that forced organizations to adapt? So structurally, there is one question. The second question, and what has it done to strategizing, right? And what kind of fundamental perspectives or tenets that companies now are being forced to take, right? The third thing is very close to your heart, I know, that what is the meaning of purpose today for business compared to, let's say, 25 years ago, and why is it so? And I think if we are able to cover these, then maybe how leadership is to change.
Right.
So it's like a sort of a cascade of things.
Right.
The trigger lies somewhere else,
Right.
but slowly. So on to you then, wherever you would like to start, these four things that was in my mind,
Sure.
wherever you would like to start.
Sure. They did. Firstly, let me thank you and Great Lakes for hosting me.
Oh.
They did warn me that Professor Shankar Venkatesh is a very tough guy in
Not
terms
really.
of being very demanding
Not really.
from knowledge perspective, and I can see why. And the last interactions that we've had, I have enormous respect for your
Thank you so
institution
much.
and you.
Thank you so much.
And and I know you're asking these questions on behalf of students and various other
Absolutely.
researchers that
Absolutely.
you have, and I'm sure you also have your points of view. And I'll ask you a couple of
Sure.
rejoinders on that
Sure.
in terms of what do you, as a
Sure.
seasoned academician,
Sure.
think
Sure.
about it. But let me, first a little bit of a caveat, if I may, that I think whatever I'm going to be talking about are my personal views,
Correct.
based on my personal
Absolutely.
experience.
Absolutely.
and they in no way represent my firm's or
Absolutely.
my clients'
Absolutely.
views or interests.
I wouldn't expect anything else.
Right. No, I just had to clarify
Absolutely.
that to begin with.
Absolutely.
Even though I work for the largest professional services firm in the world
Correct.
by a distance, I still think that I have, and I'm the chief strategy and transformation officer. I do have some points of view that I'd like to talk about, just
Those.
based on my longitudinal experience,
Correct.
as you pointed out. So I'm not an economist, but obviously there's a macro socioeconomic shift, and I think some of the fundamentals are shifting, just like you mentioned.
Correct.
So this whole left and right thing, in the French Revolution, if you stood up and sat on the left side, you were part of the left, or you were on the part of the right.
Right.
And ever since that, this left right has almost become a divide.
Right.
And in my opinion, irrespective of whether the governments have shifted left or right, I think there's a clear focus on national development and economic development. So whether it's China or India or the US or whoever, any government that you look at, or African governments, Southeast Asian governments, it is less about philosophically are they aligned in which direction. And mostly, whether it's a democratic process, largely for most countries, or whether it's a unilateral or bilateral processes that some of the others follow,
Correct.
national development is front and center of everybody's agenda.
Right.
And nowadays, national development is largely being referred around the economic development, the betterment of people. So that, I think we can take that for, that's a fundamental shift.
Sure.
There was a time, maybe 50s, 60s, and sometimes in some countries, the 40s, etc., where it was national agenda meant different things.
Correct.
But today, I think there is no government in the world, I dare say, except maybe one or two, which those are the obvious ones which we won't talk about, where national development is not all inclusive.
Sure.
And is not inclusive of economic and business and
Right.
the whole. So that's the first thing. The second, as a consequence of which, I think largely governments and businesses are looking forward and are adapting rapidly, even though we say it's a VUCA world.
Right.
And it certainly is, ambiguity is very high. In fact, the irony or the paradox rather is that all of us are very clear 20 years from now what's going to happen, right? The big shift to China and India, the big shifts that are happening. But we don't know what's going to happen next year.
Right.
Or a year and a half, or 18 months from now. In those days, we used to know fairly clearly the 3-year plan, but we had hazy thoughts about, 15, 20 years. But now it's sort of reversed from a macroeconomic perspective. So that is one clear shift. And I'll answer your question on how organizations are adopting or adapting to these changes. The second part is this big generational shift that has happened. So there was a point in time not too long ago when in all countries or in many countries, we used to refer to this whole Gen Y and Gen Z and millennials as if they were a disease.
Correct.
Right? Today, in most organizations, including mine and in India, Gen Z and Gen Y and millennials are the largest part of our workforce.
Sure.
Here they are being managed by largely leaders who are Gen X.
Gen X.
And of course, boomers are on the...
Still there.
Some of them are still there in boards and stuff.
Absolutely.
And somehow, this is not a generational gap. That is what we're used to dealing with. Generation gap is like when my son is a teenager. I have 2 sons. When they were teenagers, one would hope that they grow up and become more responsible and understand the ways of working of the world and became more real. And then that's the gap between my prioritization and his and their understanding of what is... That's a generation gap. When I don't understand their music, when I don't understand their shopping choices.
Correct.
This is a generational shift.
Correct.
It's more fundamental. The digital natives or kids who are in the workplace today are very often, let's say in India or in China, there is this concept in China that we kind of have a PhD scholar whom I'm guiding for this. There's a study, there are several studies. One of them is there's this concept of little prince and little princess in China.
Right.
Since 1970, there have been single children.
Correct.
Only now, partial revokement has happened. But in 1970 onwards, so you have those two parents who had a child who's a single child,
Right.
two other parents who have a child. Now that child is old enough to get married,
Right.
right? And those two have gotten married as single children,
Correct.
and they have a child.
Right.
That child is at work now.
Right.
6 people are spending time to bring up one kid,
One
two
kid.
grandparents on each side.
The whole
The
village.
parents, literally the whole.
Village.
And the first time that kid hears the word no is at work.
Right.
And that means that the way they understand what life is all about, what work is all about, what development is all about is very, very different. I'm not suggesting that India is as acute as the little prince, princess kind of thing. But largely, if you look at our urban kids, when they go to office or work, is when they believe that they have some people call an entitlement mentality. Some people are suggesting that they're perhaps not as hardworking. We want them to come up and work the way you and I did when we were beginning about 40 years ago.
Exactly.
That's not how things work, because if we think that in a couple of years they'll get used to it and adapt, that's a generational gap.
Correct.
Whereas it's a generational shift. We will have to change. So organizations' response, right? So the socio-economic, economic, and of course the geopolitical stuff. So if you add all of that up, every organization almost is still growing.
Sure.
Right? In one way or the other. And they're finding ways to grow, strategizing about ways to grow. They're either expanding internationally, or even domestic organizations have found ways of innovating. And I think that therefore, like my CEO very often says, for example, what he wants us to do, and I can give that as an example as a sort of a translated macro.
Right.
He says there are 3 priorities for all of us. One, we have to be a high-performing organization. There's no two ways about it. Right? We have to be high-performing. All this generational shift and all that is fine, but we have to be high-performing. The second is we have to be innovative. And you can clearly see the link there. Right. Unless we're innovative, we're not going to continue to be high-performing. And the third is we have to lead with heart. So the way we have to manage our customers, our stakeholders, our employees, ourselves has to be very different. It's got to be with heart, so you have to do it the right way. Underpinning your personal values, your organizational values, all that is fine. But these 3, I think, are useful tenets for everyone to think about, because it's not just performance and less profit maximization as the only motive, but it's profit maximization with sustainability of the world at large coming in. So if you draw a graph, high profit maximization, high level of sustainability. If you're only in the high level of sustainability, you're an altruistic organization. And that may be your choice.
May not be sustainable also.
May not be sustainable from a commercial perspective. Maybe you'll get funded, maybe, all of that. But there are altruistic organizations completely. On the other hand, profit maximization alone has driven many organizations
to the ground.
But they've been very profitable, but somehow they disappear, or they are irrelevant, or they are searching for a soul. What is today's dynamic requirement for a response to the VUCA world is we have to be both.
Correct.
Maximize on the sustainability environment as well as sustainability, the holistic word, not just pollution and environment and things like that, but overall sustainability, overall profit maximization. These 2 is what I would like to call purpose-led, impactful firms. Right? You have to be both. Now, of course, you should make money. Of course, you should be, returning to shareholders and all of that. So this a few years ago, and there are several academicians that talk about it, including Michael Porter and others, where Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, sent a letter, I think in 2016 or something, saying that, to his investee company chairman, that you're doing well financially, but are you doing good?
Correct.
Obviously, somebody like Larry Fink sends a letter that's taken very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And everybody said, what does that mean? And does that mean that you have a stated, clear purpose as to what good are you going to create for the world? Irrespective of the environmental stimulus, that is what is going to keep the unwavering focus. So many organizations, of course, like, let me take a step back. I used to work for the Tata Group for a while, looking after leadership for them. And Jayant Tata, the founder of the Tata Group, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And, part of the campus that I was in is the Tata Archives in Pune, where some of his speeches and, letters are still preserved very carefully by the Tata Group archivists. And you can see that if I were to paraphrase, he said that the purpose of the existence of an organization, he's talking about himself and his organization, is to give back more to society and the community than you take from it. Nobody used the word purpose then.
Yeah.
Right? But he obviously is a visionary and the Tata Group till date takes that very seriously. Right? Every big decision they take is not about, is it money? Of course, it's a profitable organization. Sure. It's a very well-run organization. It's not just about the money.
Sure.
But are we doing the right thing for the communities that we live in, for the society that we are supposed to serve, for our customers, for our stakeholders, etc. So holistically, purpose has been around. It's not the Larry Fink's letter triggered purpose. But if you were to look at, let's say, the Mahindra Group purpose, Mr. Anand Mahindra has said that he was brought up by his grandfather. He knew so many other people with the singular thought in his head that Indian quality should not be number 2 to anyone else.
Right.
Why are we not known for quality? That drives him deeply, and that drives their organization deeply. Right? So it's about being of a global standard. And like that, I can quote so many examples of Indian and global organizations that have had a strong sense of purpose. And it's therefore no surprise that these have withstood so many cyclical shifts that have happened. And coming back to, therefore, the purpose with which, the intent with which we exist, if you can answer the question why, that is the strongest motive for an organization to continue tweaking. You can change your structure. You'll go from network structures to maybe back to command and control, maybe back to linear structures, maybe back to drawing your boxes and lines. Or, so you can structurally adjust your organization. You can change the culture. But are these serving your purpose? You come back and question that. And how are you measuring it? Which was the second letter, the famous letter of Larry Fink, right? So a couple of years later, you remember, he followed it up with saying, okay, you're doing good for the world, but how do you know?
Yeah.
How are you measuring?
How are you measuring?
Which is what organizations. So in summary, I think, even though you brought that up as the fourth point in your introductory question, if you will, is that purpose, I think, is the unifying force, is the centrifugal force, if you will, that generates the torque that is required for the organization to keep pivoting.
Right.
Structure, you have to change. Customer strategies, you have to change. Products, you have to change. You have to innovate. Like my CEO says, high performance is not an option. Innovation is what will drive that high performance. But are you leading it the right way? And leading with heart is not just leading your employees with heart, leading your customers.
All stakeholders.
Everything. All your stakeholders with heart. Are you proud of the decisions you make?
Absolutely.
Are you sort of sheepish about it?
Right.
Are you doing it for the sake of a unidimensional metric, let's say financial? This does not purport that, a theory that you shouldn't make profits or you should reduce your... No, please maximize it. Do whatever you have to maximize it,
Sure.
or you have to do to maximize it, but do it with heart. Are you doing it the right way? Right. I don't know if that gives you a bit of a contour.
Encapsulates the 3-4 things that we were starting to discuss. Would it be then right to say this in a perspective where purpose is the enveloping variable or force? It is the driver.
Right.
And everything else has to result in achieving that purpose.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I've been thinking about for a long time. I various clients of mine, we cogitate about this together.
Correct, because it is a difficult.
It's a very tough one.
Very tough one.
Right. I mean, on one hand, I don't think one would ever achieve one's purpose.
Absolutely.
Right. Vision is what we used to say, right? That we'll never achieve the vision. Mission is what you. There's enough debate about what comes first, vision or mission. Forget all that. It doesn't matter what you call it, right? Simon Sinek calls it just cause, for example. Some people say vision is so broad and so directional, but mission is the breakup, the tangibility, and which will make it real. And
more
see there's a mission.
More executional.
Correct. More real.
What can you execute?
Correct. In order to directionally go towards
it.
I think purpose is larger than all.
Right.
Purpose should answer the question, why do I exist?
Correct.
Right? Or if I didn't exist, what will be missing in the world?
Right.
Right? Then comes your vision, and how am I going to make that happen? So the why comes first. And in a way, I think it's a quest, right? You'll agree, Professor, that it's something that we constantly keep endeavoring.
Sure.
And whenever in doubt, and J.R.D. Tara is famous for saying, whenever in doubt, he goes back to why are we here? And that gives him the North Star.
Correct.
That's okay, now I'm clear. It's sort of the reference point for making those big decisions. Because life for all of us as management of organizations, whether it's corporate or you're a small entrepreneur, is full of paradoxes, right? And the definition of a paradox is there is no right choice. So you're constantly in dilemma. Strategy itself is a dilemma.
Correct.
If it were a problem to be solved, everybody would solve it, right? There would be a right solution and you'll go for it. Very, very rarely is the answer so obvious and blindingly clear. So in dealing with paradoxes, where does a CEO go? When in doubt, what does she do? She goes to the purpose and she says, okay, this is reaffirming my purpose,
Correct.
furthering it. This is sort of either touching at the edges or contradictory to it. Then it's an easy choice. So purpose is what gives us that direction. So to me, it's more about the propelling force, what takes us forward. Even us as human beings, as individuals, as professionals, as whatever. I mean, you're an academic because you're deeply passionate about it. If that, I dare say, and maybe I'll ask you this as a question.
Sure.
Suppose tomorrow you got the best academician's job in the world, but you can't teach. It was a pure admin.
Correct.
Would you take that? Would you like that?
So interesting.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but
no, it's interesting that you asked me. I think in our previous conversation on the sidelines, I did say that I uh, chose to be a pure teaching academic and research based, teaching based academic than being a administrator plus teacher. And I think I have always, and students ask, so I've always been, this is my way of saying, I have always been led by my nose. So what does it mean? So if I like the smell of something,
you go with it.
I'll go that direction, irrespective of whether, and I won't even think about whether there is enough reward monetarily or otherwise if I go there. So I've spent more man hours with students outside the classroom than in the classroom. And I think that is very important. And maybe it comes from my own experience of a largely apathetic education system, which was most probably overburdened, the public system. I come from the public system as a student.
Right, right.
They were overburdened by numbers, underhanded, shorthanded. So, but I still feel, even on hindsight, that this less resource did not really justify the apathy with which
it was dealt with.
Wonderful. I don't think that can be, used as a fig leaf of an excuse. And I consider it a fig leaf. I think, and I become very agitated about it. Even today, at 63, I become very agitated about it. And I remember instances from 40 years ago as an undergrad.
Yeah.
And, human beings, I found this myself, injustice is something that you remember the most.
Yep, absolutely.
Successes fade away.
Come and go, yeah.
Injustices. And then how can one be the biggest hypocrite? To be worried about injustices and be at the receiving end of injustices and remembering it for 3, 4, 5 decades, whole lives. Like you said, that you can't really unlearn things. Right? Compartmentalize and move away. Yeah. So I think it's very important that an individual, whatever is his calling, it is very important that it is driven by purpose and passion,
Perfect.
rather than. Well, I think the byproduct of traveling on your purposeful line uh, is a good life,
Very good. Right.
and not necessarily monetary.
Wonderful. Wonderful. No, that's exactly where I was going. I couldn't have expressed it better. So let's think about it for a minute. You said three beautiful words which I love. You talked about calling,
Correct.
you talk about purpose, and you talk about passion. These three are inextricably intertwined,
Correct.
but they are still very discrete
Correct.
points, right? So let's talk about it for a minute. And organizations say that, many CEOs tell me, I want passionate people, passionate achievers. And I'm sorry, you don't recruit passionate people. You recruit people with a purpose. Passion will follow.
Yeah.
If your organization's purpose and your purpose clicks,
Clicks.
passion will automatically come. People are passionate about things that they love doing,
Right.
right? And that will create the calling.
Sure.
And in your case, the nose is the calling, right? It has this way of sensing, like Sumantra Ghoshal says, right? It has a way of sensing that, is this the kind of place that I want to be in?
Yeah.
Irrespective of my role. And then comes my role, right? So, am I able to influence it? Am I able to have a positive impact? So, you may not have sat down at when you were in your mid-20s or whenever you became an academic first and written down that this is my purpose. Maybe some people do, maybe some people don't. That's irrelevant. But deep down inside, I think every human being is either struggling with what is it? Why am I, doing what I'm doing? Or if they're not, they're a little bit clearer than those that are struggling with it. But everybody is discovering it as we go along. Very few say sorted, I know exactly what I'm going for. But it develops over a period of time. It also could change. It could morph. Just like for an organization, it's not going to go backwards.
Correct.
It's not going to go anti, like apathy that you spoke about, but it's got to go forward, right? So purpose is one. And then purpose alone is not good enough. So how do you build organizational capability?
Correct.
Right? So today, there is no capability that you can talk about without digital.
Right.
So you can say, okay, I have great purpose, but I have no technology. It sounds silly even as I say it. But you have to put your money where your mouth is, right? So the Tata Group can't just say that we'll give back more. How are we going to give back more? How are we going to meet each business? I'm just giving Tata as an example, but any business, my business, how am I going to be wildly successful? Because our purpose, and I can tell you this because we publish it, is to create an impact that matters for our clients, for our people, and for our nation. Let me tell you honestly, Professor, many of us partners in Deloitte, we have close to 1,000 partners and executive directors, right? We have about 33,000 people in the Deloitte India operations. Many of us, I dare say, get up and bounce into work enthusiastically because of the nation building.
Correct.
Right? We know what we're doing is going to contribute either directly or in a one degree of separation to building the nation. So whether it's projects that we are directly doing for nation building or somewhere we're helping businesses. So that way, no, this is what drives us. I'm not suggesting everybody has to be driven by something like this. You could be driven by wanting to cure cancer. That's really noble. Or you could be very simply driven by, I want to make sure that I'm building a business that I can give to someone who will make it bigger. That's also a quintessential purpose. But are you clear on why you're doing what you're doing? And how are you going to put your organizational constructs? How are you going to build your technology, your capability? This gives you the anchor for all the decisions you're making. Right? So you don't change structure for the sake of changing structure. People say that today I need to have an agile structure. Don't go for the so-called best practice. That doesn't exist. It works for someone else, doesn't have to work for you. That doesn't make it a best practice. Just because this fantastic organization is doing it. We all know what happened when, let's say, everybody wanted to implement the bell curve because it was working for GE, because it was considered best practice. Today, there are so many anti-bell curve theories.
Many companies have gone away from
But are trying hard to go away and can't because we've become victims of our learned helplessness. Right? We didn't know any other way of doing things. That means you're not innovative.
It was a managerial solution.
Yeah.
But
so they wanted high performance. It worked for them. Let them do it that way. What can I learn?
right,
So why they are doing it is more important than what they're doing. I think we felt trapped to the practice
right,
rather than the purpose.
absolutely.
Right. So the best thinking we should go after, not necessarily best practice.
One related query before we go to the concluding part of
Sure.
this is that this idea of purpose and therefore that defining the corporate existence in every which way, that's one part. The second part is what we may have seen. I'm sure we all have seen this
Yep.
in our organizations. This degree of disbelief
Yep.
or cynicism, right, at very junior levels as well.
Yep.
And what that means is that people are listening to these, people are reading material that is built around this purpose idea, but they're not fully on board. Or they find instances where they've seen seniors not on board.
Right.
So, what you say versus what you
What
do,
you do.
whatever is the reason. I have had my own share, like
Right.
I said, that
Right. Right.
even as a non-worker, as a student, as a learner, I have found that, and actually triggered me into the opposite direction.
Right.
That if apathy is something that you find unbelievably criminal, especially in teaching learning processes, structured ones, for which you're paid as a teacher, then what is the response to this?
Right.
The response was my entire life that, no, this is most important.
Yeah.
And to me, to say student centricity has got a completely different meaning compared to, let's say, customer centricity.
Sure.
So my question was this, that how do we engage
Yeah.
at various levels of the organization so that we are able to develop, if that is the word, purposeful leadership quotient?
Right.
So
it's a great question.
So your
Great
response.
question. I'll take I don't know if we have a couple of minutes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So here's my hypothesis, and I've seen this work in many instances, and I've also seen it fail in some instances. So not all organizations will click for everyone. Firstly, we can't serve every customer the way they want to be served.
Correct.
Not all of our products will satisfy every customer's need. So we have to be very clear about the segments that we're going after. Similarly with employees, similarly with leaders and stuff like that. And like you rightly pointed out, there could be hypocrisy at any level. It doesn't have to be a junior or, it doesn't have to be young, old versus, all of that. Is just that how jaded are you? You could be very young and very jaded in your thinking. And what I think, a very quick story comes to mind is when B. Ashok, the chairman then of, now retired, of Indian Oil, flew back from a conference in Singapore. He heard a staggering statistic that more than 1 million Indian women, children, and old people die every year due to indoor pollution.
Okay.
He was shocked. The entire flight, he didn't sleep. He couldn't do anything else. He came back, and legend has it that, immediately, I don't want to go into the details. This is Indian Oil. Typically, this is a public sector organization, and they have their constraints and limitations. At the same time, they have enormous resources. They said, I can't sleep. I have to do something about it. So quickly he gathered, and then they picked a pilot case. They said that we can make tiny gas cylinders, which villages can afford. And I believe that the pollution was, indoor pollution was attributable to the bad fuel that they use inside the houses. You primarily used it during winter and stuff like that because you didn't want to cook outside. And primarily women and old people and children were the ones inside the house, and they were the ones that were dying. So he couldn't. Now, a typical corporate reaction would have been, it's a good cause, but let's motivate our sales force, let's motivate R&D, etc. But what they did is, they didn't introduce any special incentive plan. They didn't
Correct.
introduce. He went out there and said, guys,
They have to solve
people
this.
are dying. How are you going to solve this?
Hmm.
And I dare say that the smokeless villages became such a big movement in Indian oil.
Right.
Of course, later it got picked up by, you know, the
HPCL
government
also.
and HPCL and everybody
Yeah.
else. But the trigger
Yeah.
was employees, cynical or otherwise, if they understand why we are doing something.
That became a
We are-
rallying point.
Now, it so happens that you are saving lives and that rallies everybody, right?
Correct.
Even the most cynical person will get thrown into that. None of them got promotions out of turn, or none of them got incentives for, you know, making the villages smokeless. They exceeded their target by some 30x or 40x, some ridiculous numbers, you know, they achieved spectacularly because people believed in the cause. Long-winded way of saying that it doesn't have to be so. People need to understand why. I'm cutting costs. We have a problem. We need to save jobs. Guys, how do we cut costs? Let people know why we're doing what we're doing.
Sure.
People will rally. And I think that's the power of purpose. Once people understand why, if you simply ask them to show up and follow a program or follow a process or follow something, look, they'll do it. It's a job. Everybody needs to get paid, right? They'll do it. But if you want them to wholeheartedly, to your word, passionately do it, they need to understand the purpose. That's my singular point, right? Limited point. But I think that therefore you should find what strikes the chord. Again, it doesn't have to be as noble as curing cancer.
Yeah.
Everyday purpose of organizations. Why are we building this new plant? Why are we going after this new customer segment? Very rarely do leaders pause and explain why.
So, I think this is a very interesting point you made at the end. This is, I have found this myself also.
Yeah.
Being a junior level, person in an organizational structure in a public university,
Right.
where a lecturer belongs.
Right.
So, and the hierarchies are long,
Tremendous,
multi-layer and so on. I think, can we say that one of the key drivers of this rallying towards a purpose is transparency at all levels?
Absolutely.
You have not even informed them what we are doing, why we are doing, and then to expect everyone
Why
to
to chodiye, Professor? That doesn't happen.
correct.
What also is half-baked. And if anybody comes, they say, no, just do this.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Yeah.
Trust the manager. Okay, we'll trust. But only if there's a track record of, during crisis, you don't have time to explain maybe.
Correct.
But that's the worst case scenario. Not all of our organizations are in crises all the time. And if they are, people will get it, right? So you don't want people to panic and, there's a bit of subterfuge. People understand. There have been organizations that had to lay off people, but have come out as best employers while they've been laying off people.
Right.
By independent measurement.
Correct.
Because they do it the right way, they state people get it. Right? Please do not underestimate that people don't intellectually or from heart understand what's going on, provided they are told.
Right.
What kills things, what kills motivation, is this when you game them.
Yeah.
Either consciously,
Sure.
look, no CEO gets up and I'm going to game my guys.
Yeah.
Or they think that maybe they want to understand and they game them. There's some other agenda.
Gaming could be done with the positive motivations also. Positive.
Saying, let me not tell my children that that I'm having a problem.
Try to shield
that's
them.
a nice thing. I'm
Correct.
shielding. No.
Correct.
This is an adult relationship at work.
Right.
We have to approach it that way.
I'm happy
This
you
is
say
my
that.
point of view.
I'm happy you say that because I think this you hit the nail on the head when you said this is adult relationship, right? And it has to be I'm okay, you're okay kind of a relationship, right? And I think I keep thinking that sometimes I feel that mid managers have the more crucial responsibility and job of running the company.
Most responsibility and least information.
Correct.
That's a typically, there is a paradox here again.
Correct.
And you expect them to deliver, but you expect them to deliver without question, and that increasingly, Professor, is not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
Yeah, it's just not going to work.
Okay, so I think there is enough meat in what we have discussed to segue into the concluding part. I think listeners who are listening to this could be current students, could be young managers who have just gone out, or could be mid-level, senior level people. I think it will be interesting for all of us to talk a little bit about what could be a self-development process that everyone can do on his or her own self, and use it for personal and professional growth both. So it's too broad a question. So let's say uh, people in junior management roles or B school students entering into the workforce from that level to mid level, if we can
Yeah.
talk a little bit.
No, that's the. Thank you for, because otherwise it's like you
It
said, it's
becomes
a large
too big.
field. In my view, absolutely personally, I think what I see, and I work a lot with leadership development areas for more senior people as well as the emerging leaders. What I see is that youngsters have to embrace learning vigorously,
Right.
right? And I know everybody says that, and when I was a young man at one point in time, when somebody said that, I used to roll my eyes and say, yeah, yeah, we know all that. But I'm genuinely saying that learning with a passion, and learning not from what is the organization offering to me, what sessions are you sending me to,
Correct.
or what courses have I gone. Instead, embracing learning from being an apprentice to someone.
Right.
When I sit with you, when I go for a meeting with you, and you're a middle manager and I'm a new management trainee, I have to soak it in. So I have to shut up and listen,
Correct.
and I have to absorb, and most importantly, I have to reflect.
Right.
So number one is, I think our folks, once you embrace learning, you have to reflect on how do I learn.
Right.
Some people learn by watching, some people learn by doing, some people learn by reading or absorbing. It doesn't matter what your style is, but are you continuously learning? Are you better at something this month than you were last month?
Absolutely.
Are you better at something this year than you were at last year? So that's your increased learning enthusiasm. The second is, how is that relevant for my organization?
Right.
I could become better in German, or I could become better at playing volleyball. That's good. That's for me.
Correct.
But how is that going to have an impact on my organizational performance?
Correct.
I have to draw that link.
Correct.
And if I can do that, then I'm furthering the organization's mission as well as growing on my own.
Right.
By all means, have a hobby.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I think that's, even we're getting too carried away with this purpose thing that everything has to have. Sometimes you want to do things just for fun. Have a hobby, because research has proved, and I'm sure you are well aware of this, Professor, but for the sake of the listeners, research has proved that you learn anything, even Swahili, which has nothing to do with your work will improve.
Correct.
Anything you learn and become better at, it has an impact on your on the job performance and
on
so
all
on.
other aspects of
On
your
every
life.
other aspect of your life, right?
Sure.
So learning contributes the fuel for growth in many, many ways, multifaceted ways. So first, learning. The second is, be very thoughtful about where you are going. As in, what are the trajectories that are available to you, and don't go for the conventional. Next, I want to get my manager's job, and that's what I mean by growth. In fact, more and more frequently, you will find that that is not growth. That's just a bigger responsibility, but you're not actually going to grow. You're just going to maybe grow in your territory or your numbers or whatever, but you're not going to grow. So, for example, if you're a marketing professional, do you understand rural marketing? Or are you sitting in South Bombay and figuring out what to do in Belgaum?
Right.
Do you know what is happening in grassroots? So many of our kids today want to go into marketing. But I dare say that unless you've done field sales,
Absolutely,
in a rigorous fashion, not just exposure of 10 days in field sales, unless you've carried a quota, unless you've met that wholesaler, unless you've had chai with him in his teka,
correct.
you don't really get the. And what kind of a marketer you're going to be? You're going to be a shallow marketer. You're just counting time. So I would like everybody, and this is, it's difficult for youngsters to conceptualize, but I want you to treat this job as if this is the only job you'll have.
Absolutely.
And therefore, put everything into it. I'm seeing many youngsters coming in counting time to get to the next job.
Absolutely. This is a stepping stone.
It's, I'm here only for a short while. Okay, that's fine. Be ambitious and all. But don't be ambitious on a daily basis. Every day, give your best to this job. Don't worry about what's going to happen. And I, again, think that this might sound a little esoteric and philosophical, but unless you actually do that, you won't learn, which goes back to my first point. That you won't learn and become better and better and better at your current job. You're constantly always looking at, what's next, what's next, what's next. Next will come. And I think that now, hopefully, I'm seeing a little more sense coming in than, we used to, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, we used to have a CV search, and then average 2 years, you've jumped 3 jobs or 4 jobs.
Correct.
I'm hoping that it'll settle down. It's fine. Go switch organization. Sometimes it just doesn't click.
Yeah.
Chemistry doesn't work. This is not my kind of team, my kind of organization, my kind of product set. That's fine. But unless there is a compelling reason, don't move for the sake of the next so-called jump, right? Have you evolved, then move.
Right.
If you've not evolved, evolve, right? Movement will happen. That's the second thing. And third and final thing, I think, is be an exemplar in something, meaning not a role model, but be fantastic at something.
Yeah.
You have to be world class. If I have 6 things, 6 attributes, 6 competencies or whatever, I need to pick one. What the CEO, the founder of NVIDIA says, find a craft and go after it. Right? I truly believe in that. It could be anything, but work related. It could be anything, but you should be like, everybody should know world class means go to this guy.
Absolutely.
That, right? I don't, and that won't be possible unless you think deep and, go after truly becoming a maestro at that. And that's why I call it an exemplar. The difference between being a role model and exemplar, which obviously but for clarity, is a role model is somebody I want to become like. Yeah. But an exemplar is a brilliant expert. Even your enemy will not disagree you're an exemplar. Your enemy doesn't want to be you to be the role model. Absolutely. Somebody who hates you will also, I hate that person. But in that area, they are just world class. These are the 3 things I would like to.
Absolutely. I think we can continue on this for longer than this, but I think this is a good point to conclude our conversation today, Anand. And to paraphrase, purpose seems to be driving all aspects of a business. And we, through some examples that you quoted, most probably the longevity and sustainability of a brand or a business is largely defined by their allegiance to a purpose and following it through with their actions repeatedly again and again. Whichever new business they go into, the same value system drives them. And the example of the Tatas is a very good example, I think. So that's one part. And the second part, I think, is a takeaway for our friends who are listening today, that you said 3 things. And those 3 things are, I think, key, irrespective of which position one is. There was a very old organizational development and behavioral model, and it keeps coming to my head almost on a daily basis. And I think that this was a classification. You remember the famous author duo Hershey and Blanchard, right? So that was my textbook. And I think it is such an enduring model to have here. And they said that, broadly 3 skills: technical skills, human skills, and conceptual skills. And as you grow up in stature and rank in the organization with more experience, right? Not necessarily gray hair, but more experience, the need for technical skill sort of reduces a bit. Human skills you always require. But the conceptual skills increase. The demand for that increases. And in many forums, especially interacting students, it comes into my narrative willy-nilly from here or
Right.
there,
Right.
whether I teach marketing or doesn't, what not. So I explain it to them in my own way. I said, the ability to realize where you are
Yeah.
in the organization and then connect it with your purpose and what the organization wants from you and behave accordingly.
Yeah.
Behave accordingly. So the other, we were talking about entrepreneurial abilities. Literal meaning risk taking. And if a
Being
manager
bold.
is
Yeah.
not a risk taker,
Then
then
don't manage.
they don't manage it. So I think, I hope that this discussion has been found by most of you listening to us today. You found it rewarding or enriching. I must thank Anand Shankarji for spending so much time with us and explaining with very lucid explanations of, I dare say, very complex phenomena. And we are all students in that. We are all learners. We are hopefully progressing 1 inch after the other every day because this doesn't end. And something we have been doing very well in a way in which we have been doing it very well, the next day it fails.
Yep.
And then we are suddenly back to
Square one. Yeah.
the square one, designing table, and again. So this happens at all levels. And I think uh, I'm very happy that I got the opportunity, Anand, for this conversation with you. And thank you so much. And I want to elicit a promise from you that we will have some more opportunities like this in the future. If face to face is difficult, we can always connect digitally. And thank you so much.
Well,
Anand.
thank you for having me here. It's always a brilliant conversation to have with you
Thank you.
any time of day or night. And I'll
Thank
do
you.
it twice on a Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much.
much.
Thank you.